My son-in-law poisoned my wife with my daughter's help now. He's testifying against her. It started with a police call I'll never forget. Mr. Hale, your son-in-law is turning state's witness against your daughter. They'd already taken Jessica in. The woman I'd once rocked to sleep now in handcuffs for helping poison her own mother. And the man she did it for, the charming, smiling son-in-law, sat in an interrogation room, trading loyalty for leniency. When they let me see her, she looked at me like a stranger. "Dad, please," he said. "Mom wanted to die peacefully. We just helped." I felt something in me break cleanly in half. "You helped? By putting poison in her tea?" Her lips trembled. "He said it wouldn't kill her, just make her rest." "He lied to you, Jessica," I said, voice low. "And now he's testifying to save himself." Her eyes went wide. "He what?" I nodded once. "You picked your side, sweetheart. So did he. I guess 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past, not clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you, and where are you listening? I used to wake before sunrise, not because I had to anymore, but because 40 years of courtroom mornings had carved the habit into me. The house was quiet, no alarms, no ringing phones, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the sound of the lake brushing against the dock outside. After decades of dealing with criminals, lies, and cross-examinations, I had finally earned this silence. Linda called it our sanctuary. I called it justice. Most mornings began the same way. She'd hum an old song while watering the ferns. I'd pour coffee into 2 crystal mugs, one chipped on the handle from the day Emily was born. We never replaced it. "It's proof life doesn't need to be perfect," Linda always said. On the far wall hung Emily's photo, her graduation day smile frozen in that warm May sunlight we still talked about as if it had happened yesterday. That morning the sky was a perfect slate blue. Linda was ironing a blouse, the soft floral one she wore when she wanted to look her best for Jessica. "She called last night," Linda said, her voice light, but her hands too quick on the fabric. "She wants us to visit this weekend," said Brian, finally finished the patio. I nodded, pretending not to notice the tiny tremor in her voice when she said Brian. "That man never finished anything in his life until someone else paid for it," I said with a faint smile. Linda shot me a look, the kind that meant not today. The phone rang just after breakfast. Jessica's name flashed across the screen. I could tell from the chirpy tone she was rehearsed. "Hi, Dad. Listen, can Mom stay a few days with us? Jessica says she misses her cooking." She used her own name in the third person like she always did when she wanted something. I almost laughed at how transparent it sounded. "Is everything all right over there?" I asked. "Oh, everything's great. We just thought it'd be nice to have her around. Brian's been so busy, he really misses you two." Her voice thickened with that sugary politeness that always made me uneasy. From the background, I heard Brian's voice, muffled but sharp. "Tell him we'll take good care of her." I told myself not to overthink it. Family helps family. That's what I'd preached for years, back when I still believed hard work and decency protected people. Back before I realized that generosity can turn into a leash if you're not careful. As Linda packed, I found myself watching her more closely than usual. She folded her sweaters with deliberate care, set her wedding ring in the small jewelry dish by the sink, something she only did when she planned to cook a lot. "I'll be back before Sunday," she said, brushing her hand against my cheek. "You should finish sanding that cabinet before it rains." I nodded. "Call me when you get there." When she pulled out of the driveway, her silver sedan gleamed against the morning light. I stood by the porch steps, coffee in hand, and listened to the tires fade down the hill. Something about the silence afterward felt different, too heavy. Inside, the house looked exactly as it should. Books aligned, legal files labeled, everything in its place. But that stillness that used to soothe me now pressed like a weight on my chest. I sat down in my leather chair facing Emily's framed photo. Her smile hadn't changed, but I could swear her eyes looked different today, less like memory, more like warning. That was the last morning the world made sense. The last day coffee tasted normal. I ran my thumb along the chipped handle of the mug and told myself it was nothing. Just Linda helping our daughter, like always. But deep down, something old in me, the part that used to sense when a story didn't add up, had started to stir again. I looked out over the still water and whispered, "Keep her safe." The lake didn't answer. The phone rang again 2 days later, around dusk. I was in the garage, oiling the hinges on the old filing cabinet. a habit I'd picked up after retirement. The cabinet held 40 years of order, case notes, tax folders, Linda's recipes, and Emily's drawings. The sound of the phone startled me more than it should have. I wiped my hands on a rag and picked up. "Richard, it's Brian," the voice said, smooth and practiced. He always led with his name, like a salesman afraid I'd forget who he was. "Listen, Jess and I were thinking, maybe you and Linda could come over for dinner tomorrow night, just us, family." His tone had that syrupy warmth people use when they want something. "That's thoughtful," I said cautiously. "Everything all right?" "Of course. We just haven't seen you much lately. Jess misses you guys. And I figured it's time to move past old tensions. You've always been like a father to me, sir. I just want to make Jessica happy again." "Sir, not Dad. The way con men say sir before they steal your wallet." I told him I'd think about it. When I hung up, Linda was standing in the doorway, apron still on, flour on her hands. "That was Brian, wasn't it?" I nodded. She smiled faintly. "Richard, he's trying. Maybe we should let them. It's family." That word family used to mean something sacred. Now it felt like an open tab I couldn't close. The next evening, we drove up the hill to Jessica's new house, the one with the manicured hedges and the oversized mailbox that still bore our last name because I'd helped with the down payment. The memory stung. Flashback came easy me in a bank office 3 years earlier, signing papers next to Brian, who'd said, "I'll take care of them like my own parents, sir." He'd promised to refinance after the first year. He never did. When we pulled into the driveway, the lights glowed too bright for a quiet dinner. Inside, Brian greeted us with an expensive-smelling cologne and a grin too wide. Jessica hovered beside him, parroting his every tone. "Dad, Mom, look at you two, still the cutest couple in town." She hugged me like it was for the camera. Dinner smelled like butter and deceit. Brian poured wine I didn't recognize imported, he said, and filled my glass before I could decline. Linda, ever polite, complimented the roast chicken. He kept the conversation light at first, golf, weather, neighborhood gossip. Then he pivoted, casually. "So, Richard," he said, slicing into his chicken with surgical precision, "how's retirement treating you? I've been reading about how volatile pensions can be these days. Bet it's nice to have your accounts diversified." I froze mid-sip. It wasn't curiosity, it was inventory. "Doing fine," I said. "We live within our means." "Oh?" He smiled, not embarrassed at all. "Good, good. You've always been disciplined. Maybe one day I'll learn that from you." Learn wasn't the word he meant. Access was. The conversation drifted, but the air thickened. Jessica laughed too loudly at his jokes, the way she used to when she was trying to hide something as a teenager. My fork clinked against the plate louder than I meant. I told myself not to judge. Family dinners could be awkward. Maybe I was overanalyzing old prosecutor habits die hard. Then, at the end of the meal, Brian lifted his glass. "To second chances," he said, looking directly at me. The words hung there longer than the silence that followed. Linda smiled softly, unaware. "That's nice, honey." I nodded, keeping my face calm. But something cold began spreading in my gut, the way it used to when a witness rehearsed their story one too many times. I felt Emily's absence like a warning in the air. She'd always been the one to sense trouble first. As we drove home that night, Linda hummed along to the radio, content. I stared out the window at the passing streetlights, each one flickering across the windshield like a slow countdown. I wanted to believe in peace, in family, in forgiveness. I really did. But the way he'd said second chances, that wasn't about reconciliation. That was about rehearsal. And somewhere deep down, beneath all my reasoning, I felt it. Something was already in motion. I should have known better than to expect boundaries from people who never learned them. When Brian called the following week, his voice carried that same polished friendliness I'd begun to dread. "Just family again," he said. "Low-key. Linda's apple pie, my grill, the works." Linda wanted to go. "It's good for Jessica," she said. "She's trying." "Oh." I bit back the reminder that good intentions don't erase patterns. "Fine," I said, and let it go. That was mistake number one. When we pulled into their driveway Saturday evening, cars lined both sides of the street. The kind of cars you rent when you want people to think you own them. The laughter hit before the front door opened, young, loud, oblivious. Jessica appeared in the doorway wearing a cocktail dress, her smile too bright. Dad, Mom, you made it. Oh, Brian invited a few friends. You always said you liked the house full of life. A few friends. 8 people, maybe more, scattered through the open-concept living room like it was an Airbnb. Someone I'd never met was drinking from my daughter's wedding crystal. A man in designer loafers nodded to me without introducing himself. Linda's face stayed polite, but I saw her hand tighten around her purse strap. We didn't want to intrude, she said softly. Brian appeared behind Jessica, tongs in hand, a beer balanced against his hip. You're not intruding, you're the guests of honor. Everyone, this is the man who taught me discipline. Retired prosecutor, 40 years keeping bad guys off the street. Careful what you say around him, he's got that prosecutor brain. Laughter, the kind that's more at than with. I smiled thinly. I retired the badge, not the ears. For a moment, Brian's grin faltered. Then it was back, broader than before. By dessert, Linda looked pale. Maybe we should head out soon, she whispered. Jessica didn't hear her or didn't want to. Dad, you'll stay for the nightcap, right? Brian opened the good bourbon. I'm driving, I said. Oh, come on, you can relax now. You're retired. Retired didn't mean dead. It meant I'd spent a lifetime cleaning up other people's messes and finally earned the right not to sit through another one. Linda excused herself to the bathroom. I saw the faint slump in her shoulders as she walked away, that quiet exhaustion she never admitted. Brian leaned close then, lowering his voice. You know, sir, it means a lot that you came. Jess was worried you still didn't trust me. I met his gaze. Trust is earned. He chuckled. Then we'll just have to keep working on that, won't we? He clinked his glass against mine, without waiting for agreement. We left close to midnight. The laughter followed us out, still echoing as I opened the car door for Linda. She looked half asleep, the kind of tired that seeps into bone. I drove in silence, headlights cutting long streaks of light across the road. Halfway home, she whispered, Maybe it's good for them to have people around. It keeps them from fighting. I didn't answer. I used to think silence kept peace. But sometimes silence is permission. When we got home, I went straight to the study. The filing cabinet drawer slid open with that satisfying click order. Predictability, my kind of comfort. I placed the gas receipt, the dinner invitation printout, and Brian's business card inside a folder labeled Family. Under it sat Emily's old sketch of the lake, perfectly still, untouched. I stared at it for a long time before closing the drawer. Something told me that stillness was about to break. It started with a delay. Not a big one, just small enough to seem reasonable. Linda called that Monday morning, her voice gentle, apologetic. Honey, Brian says it's better if I stay a few more days. The drive's a lot, and Jess wants to cook for me. You know how she is, she needs to feel useful. I told her it was fine, of course it was. What kind of husband argues with his wife for wanting to spend time with their daughter? Still, something in her tone, it sounded rehearsed, like she was quoting someone else's line. We just thought Mom should stay a little longer. The drive's too much for her at her age. That was Brian, chiming in faintly in the background, his voice cutting through the speaker like a cough drop wrapped in sugar. I didn't like it, but I told myself to let it go. Family helps family. I'd built my life on that principle. 3 days passed, then a week. The house grew too quiet. Her slippers stayed under the coffee table, the way she'd left them pointed toward her chair. I found myself cleaning even what was already clean. That's what men like me do when the world starts slipping. We cling to order. On the 7th day, Brian showed up unannounced. Just checking in, sir, he said, flashing that grin I'd come to hate. Jessica's been exhausted with Mom staying over. I thought maybe I'd grab some of her clothes, make her more comfortable. He let himself halfway in before I could answer. I noticed the cologne first cheap, overpowering, the kind that tried to mask something else. It lingered in the air long after he brushed past me toward the bedroom. Brian, I said, keeping my voice level. Next time, call before dropping by. He turned, smile fixed, tone polite but sharp. Of course, sir. Just didn't want Linda missing her things. She's been a little forgetful lately. Forgetful. That word hit wrong. After he left, I sat in her chair and dialed Linda again. It rang 4 times before she answered. Oh, Rich, sorry, Brian just left. He's been helping around the house, doing the heavy stuff. Everything okay? Of course, he's been wonderful. She said it too fast. Too grateful. Then, almost as an afterthought, Jessica's been resting a lot. You know how much stress she's under. I wanted to ask what stress she didn't work. Not really, but the sound of Brian's voice in the background cut me off. Tell him we'll bring dinner soon. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling something had shifted. The power dynamic, the distance, it all tilted their way. Her texts became vague, half sentences. Love you, without the heart she always added. Later, instead of call you tonight, I scrolled through them at the kitchen counter, my thumb hovering over the screen like it could summon her home. The next morning I noticed something else. My car smelled different Brian's cologne. Faint, but there. The passenger seat pushed back farther than Linda would ever set it. He'd borrowed the car. I didn't remember saying yes. I went to my study and opened the filing cabinet again, that old ritual of reassurance. Labeled drawers, receipts in order, the scent of metal and paper, the smell of control. I'd faced murderers, con artists, men who lied under oath without flinching, yet none of them unnerved me like this, the polite smile of a son-in-law playing caretaker while tightening invisible strings. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. I fought criminals for a living, I said to the empty room, but I can't fight my own blood without feeling like a monster. So I did what kind men do when reason clashes with instinct. I convinced myself to trust. I texted Linda, "Take your time. I'm fine." Then I turned off the phone and sat there until the sun dipped low, the house creaking around me. It wasn't silence anymore, it was absence. I drove out to Jessica's house on a Thursday, unannounced. Call it instinct. A week had passed since Brian's surprise visit to my place, and I hadn't heard Linda's voice without his in the background since. Her texts were clipped, cheerful, in a way that read like she was performing. When I pulled into their driveway, I barely recognized the place. Toys on the lawn that didn't belong to any child, trash bin overflowing, and through the open front door music. Loud, poppy, and wrong for the hour. Inside, the air smelled like spilled beer and something sweetly artificial, cheap perfume maybe. Linda sat on the couch, pale, wearing a cardigan I'd never seen. She looked smaller somehow, as if the room had swallowed part of her. Jessica was standing by the kitchen island, phone raised high, talking into the lens. "Hey guys, so Mom's feeling so much better, thanks for the love. She's literally the strongest woman I know." Linda tried to smile, but her hand trembled. I saw the pill organizer on the table, one compartment empty, the rest half filled. "Jess," I said evenly, "put the phone down." She flinched, more from annoyance than guilt. "Dad, relax. It's just my followers. They care." Her followers. Strangers watching my wife's frailty like entertainment. Brian emerged from the hallway, barefoot, beer in hand. "Hey, Pops. Didn't know you were coming. Want a drink?" "No," I said. My voice came out colder than I intended. He shrugged and leaned on the counter. "Suit yourself." I looked at Linda again. "You okay, sweetheart?" She nodded quickly. "Just tired. Brian's been helping with my medication." "Helping?" I asked. Brian grinned. "Yeah, Mom said it's fine. I'll just keep her pills here, it's more convenient." The words hit me like a hammer wrapped in velvet. Convenient for who? I picked up the half-empty organizer, turning it in my hand. "You sure that's wise? She needs consistency." Brian's tone hardened. "You think I don't know how to take care of my mother-in-law?" "I think she's my wife, and she has a prescription schedule for a reason." Jessica intervened, her voice sharp now. "Dad, please, you're overreacting. Brian's been amazing. He even called the pharmacy to sort things out." I looked at the countertop, 3 empty beer cans, 2 open bottles of wine. The smell of hops mixed with Linda's lavender lotion. My stomach turned. I wanted to snap. Years in prosecution taught me how to read liars, but it also taught me the cost of anger. You can't win a case by yelling. You win it by waiting, by remembering. Linda's eyelids fluttered as Jessica raised her phone again, angling it toward the mantel. "And this," Jessica cooed to her followers, "is my beautiful sister Emily, watching over us." The camera lingered on Emily's framed photo, our daughter, who'd never lived past 23. They'd placed fake candles around it like props. I felt the breath leave my body. Jessica turned back, smiling through tears that weren't real. "People love that photo. It makes them feel connected." Brian chuckled, scrolling through comments. Engagement's up 20%, babe. That was when I knew I was standing in a room full of ghosts. The living kind, the ones who feed off what used to be sacred. I stayed another hour, long enough to drive Linda home myself. She protested weakly, saying Jessica needed her. But when she reached for her purse, Brian was quicker. I'll hold on to this. Don't want you forgetting it here. His tone was light, but his eyes weren't. That night, after putting Linda to bed, I poured myself a drink I didn't touch. I opened the filing cabinet again, finding the old envelope from 5 years ago, the one marked Brian loan repayment. $30,000. Paid off to help him start fresh. Every good deed I ever did for that boy feels like evidence now. I shut the drawer slowly, the sound echoing louder than it should have. The invitation came as a text from Jessica. Family barbecue Saturday. Brian wants to make peace. The heart emoji felt like an insult. Still, Linda insisted we go. She's reaching out, she said, her voice thinner than usual. Don't make this about pride, Richard. I didn't answer. Pride wasn't the word. Instinct was. When we arrived, the smell of smoke and cheap charcoal hung in the air. Brian stood at the grill wearing an apron that said, King of the Pit, beer already in hand. He waved like nothing had ever gone wrong. There's the man himself, he called out. Come on, sir, grab a plate. His friends were there again. The same ones from the few friends' dinner, plus a few new faces, louder, younger, meaner. They laughed too easily, the kind of laughter that covers for disrespect. I helped Linda to a chair. She looked pale, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted her hat. Just for an hour, she whispered. Of course, I said. But my eyes were already scanning the open cooler, the half-empty bottles, the way Brian poured her drink before she asked for one. At first, I stayed quiet, keeping my distance by the fence. I've learned that when you want the truth, silence is a better tool than confrontation. People fill silence with their real selves. And that's exactly what Brian did. I heard him talking near the patio, voice lowered but not enough. Don't worry about the old man, he said to one of his buddies. He won't even notice if she's gone for good. He's too busy polishing his trophies. The laughter that followed hit me harder than any insult I'd ever faced in court. Gone for good. I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. For a second, I felt something raw rise in me. The old prosecutor's instinct to strike, to demand the statement repeated, recorded, entered into evidence. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled. The kind of smile that hides 1,000 things. He turned and saw me standing there. You okay, sir? You look tense. Must be the smoke. Could be, I said evenly. That night, I started writing again. Not legal briefs, logs, notes, times, dates, details. Every word he said, every beer he opened, every pill Linda took that wasn't hers to take. I even wrote down what the neighbor, Mrs. Grant, had mentioned casually last week. Linda looked so tired, dear. You should make sure she's eating enough. Evidence doesn't start with proof. It starts with suspicion that refuses to die. Over the next few days, I began keeping my phone on record whenever Brian visited. Just in case, I told myself. I'd spent my life believing justice was built in court. I was wrong. It begins at home. Linda's health kept slipping. She'd forget small things. A pan left burning, the wrong name on her prescription bottle. When I mentioned it, Jessica bristled. Dad, you're stressing her out. Stop hovering. She's fine. I wanted to believe her. I really did. Then one afternoon, I walked into the kitchen to find Brian pouring 2 glasses of wine in the middle of the day. Linda's pill case sat open beside him. Long day? I asked. He smiled. That fake politeness now more of a smirk. Just keeping Mom company. You work too hard at worrying, sir. I didn't respond. Instead, I pressed the record button in my pocket and leaned on the counter. You know, Brian, people who joke about death should be careful how loud they talk. Sound carries. His grin faltered for half a second before snapping back in place. Relax, Dad. We're family. That line, so casual, so poisonous, settled into me like a cold stone. Later that night, I wrote it in my notebook, word for word, underlined twice. Then I whispered into the quiet house, family doesn't need evidence until it does. The call came just after noon on a Saturday. I was in the backyard trimming the hedges when Jessica's number flashed across my phone. Her voice trembled, but not in the way panic sounds more like performance. Dad, don't freak out, okay? Mom fainted, that's all. Brian called 911, but she's fine. Just meet us at the house. For a second, the world went white around me. The hedge trimmer fell to the grass. I didn't even lock the front door. The drive to their place took 15 minutes. I did it in 10, running red lights I wouldn't have dared in my career days. When I arrived, the ambulance lights splashed red and white across the windows. Neighbors stood in their driveways murmuring. I pushed through the small crowd, my breath short. Linda was on a stretcher, her skin ashen, lips pale, her eyelids fluttered weakly. "Linda," I called, reaching for her hand. "Cold. Too cold." "She just fainted, Dad," Jessica said, her tone brittle, like she was already tired of the story. "You're overreacting again. Maybe it's time you let go." Let go. Brian stepped between me and the EMTs, his arms stretched casually like a bouncer. "Sir, please let them do their job. She'll be fine. Probably dehydration." His composure was too practiced. No panic, no guilt, just control. I wanted to shove him aside, but the rational part of me, the one that had built a career in restraint, kept me still. Instead, I watched as he leaned toward the paramedics, his voice low. "She's been a little confused lately. Forgetful. Maybe some early dementia. My wife and I have been worried. That's how liars win, by planting seeds while you're still too stunned to protest." I followed the stretcher out to the ambulance, but Brian blocked me again. "Just let them take her. You can follow in your car. Jessica's already riding along." He smiled, that counterfeit smile. "Don't worry, Dad. I've got it handled." Handled. The doors closed, sealing my wife inside with the two people I trusted least. I drove after them, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My phone buzzed nonstop with notifications. Jessica posted a story. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. A video, her teary face angled just right, soft filter on. "Please pray for my mom," she said, voice trembling for the camera. "She's been so strong, but we need your prayers, guys." In the corner, you could see Brian's reflection adjusting the curtain, making sure the light hit just right. They were turning my wife's collapse into content. By the time I reached the hospital, she was already in a private room. The nurse at the desk asked if I was the father. "The husband," I corrected. She frowned at the chart. "Oh, sorry." The son-in-law filled this out. "He said you'd arrive later." I stared at the clipboard. "Emergency contact. Brian Mercer, not me." When I entered the room, Linda was asleep under two white sheets. Jessica sat beside her, phone in hand, scrolling through comments, people she didn't even know sending heart emojis. Brian leaned against the wall, sipping coffee. "Doctor says it's exhaustion," he said casually. "She'll bounce back. I'll make sure she gets the best care." I stood at the foot of the bed, memorizing every detail, her IV, the heart monitor, the faint bruise on her arm. My brain went into prosecutor mode. Evidence, not emotion. Record, don't react. "I'll talk to the doctor myself," I said. Brian's jaw tightened. "You don't need to. I already did." I didn't argue. I just nodded slowly and took out my phone under the pretense of checking a message. The voice memo app was already recording. I saw her eyelids flutter and thought, this is how quiet evil wins, by pretending to care louder than you. Hours later, after the nurses ushered us out, Brian clapped me on the shoulder. "Go home, sir. Get some rest. I'll stay with her." I didn't move. He lowered his voice. "Relax. You can trust me." I looked him in the eye. That's exactly what worries me. The call came 3 days after the collapse. The hospital's tone was clipped, rehearsed, the kind reserved for people who've said the same thing 100 times. "Mr. Hale, I'm sorry to inform you." The rest blurred. Poison. Traces of it in her system. Unclear source. The words didn't land like thunder, they landed like dust. Slow, settling, suffocating. I drove there on autopilot. The nurse met me outside the room, eyes avoiding mine. Linda's body lay still under white sheets, her wedding ring already removed and placed in a small plastic bag. I'd seen bodies before, hundreds maybe, but never one that had belonged to my life. Jessica was there. Her makeup was perfect, like grief had to pass through a camera filter first. She looked up, red-eyed, but dry. "Dad," she went peacefully, she said, as if reading from a prepared line. Brian stood behind her. hands on her shoulders, the picture of support. He even dabbed at his own eyes with a tissue. We did everything we could, sir. Sir. That word again. I stared at him, the ring of Linda's still finger echoing in my mind. The doctor said poison, I said quietly. He blinked, almost theatrically. That can't be right. She was taking supplements. Maybe something reacted badly. Jessica turned to me, voice rising. Dad, stop it. He loved Mom too. You're just looking for someone to blame. Blame, the word twisted in my gut. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. You really think I don't see it? The bottles, the pills, the changes in her handwriting? She flinched. Brian didn't. He just sighed and looked at the floor like a man weary of drama. Maybe you should talk to someone, sir. Grief can, well, it can distort things. That tone, calm, professional, dismissive. The same tone I used to hear from guilty men right before the handcuffs clicked. The police showed up later that evening, a brief interview at the hospital. Brian guided them like a conductor. She'd been forgetful. The doctors mentioned fatigue. Maybe she took too many herself. My wife and I did everything we could. He even handed over the supplement bottles himself. Perfectly labeled. Perfectly cleaned. I said nothing. Not yet. At home that night, I walked through the house like it was someone else's. Her cup still sat on the table, half full of cold tea. Her knitting basket by the couch. Everything preserved, like time hadn't gotten the memo. I went to the study. On my desk sat Emily's framed photo, our daughter who'd never gotten to grow old. Linda used to talk to that picture, like she was still listening. I turned it face down. That was the night I stopped being a husband and started being an investigator again. I pulled the files from the drawer, the notes, the recordings, the voice memos. My hand shook, but not from grief anymore. From focus. From purpose. In the morning, Jessica called. Dad, you should rest. We'll take care of the arrangements. Mom wanted something simple. I almost laughed. Simple, I repeated. Like her death? She hung up. Later that day, I called a man I hadn't spoken to in years, a former colleague, now a private investigator. I didn't even have to explain. You think it was intentional? He asked. I don't think, I said. I know. I just need proof. He hesitated. This will hurt, Richard. It already does. When I hung up, I sat in the leather chair Linda had picked out 30 years ago. The lake outside looked calm, reflecting the sky the same way it had when we first moved in. I used to think calm meant peace. Now I knew better. Calm is just what water looks like before it drowns you. I buried my wife and the illusion of my family in the same week. And as the sun sank behind the trees, I made myself a promise. I'd find the truth, even if it killed whatever was left of us. Grief used to paralyze me. This time it sharpened me. I'd buried enough evidence in my career to recognize when something didn't fit, and my wife's death didn't fit, not in the timeline, not in the symptoms, not in the way Brian kept calling it a tragedy instead of a crime. Jessica called that morning, her voice syrupy and strained. Dad, I know you're hurting, but please don't call the police. Brian already handled everything. You'll just embarrass us. Embarrass us. Her choice of words did something to me. Broke something clean. I didn't yell, didn't argue. I just said, I'll handle it, and hung up. Then I went to my study and locked the door. The sound of the deadbolt was final, satisfying. I hadn't locked that room in years. The filing cabinet sat against the far wall, brushed steel, edges polished by habit. Linda used to tease me about it. You organize grief the same way you organize taxes. Maybe she was right, but order was the only thing that ever saved me. I sat down, turned on the desk lamp, and opened the top drawer. Receipts, timelines, notes, everything neatly labeled. I slid out the new folder. Case file, Hale. I started by dialing 911. My voice was steady. I'm reporting a suspected poisoning, I said. The dispatcher's tone shifted from routine to cautious. Do you have proof, sir? I looked at the cabinet. I'm collecting it. After the call, I opened my laptop. Search history. Private investigator near Lakefield County. I found the same man I'd called before, Tom Leary, retired detective, now running his own firm. Richard Hale, he said when he answered, recognition in his tone. I heard about your wife. You sure you want to go down this road? I don't have a choice. We met that afternoon at his office. Fluorescent lights, bad coffee, the smell of old paper. I handed him an envelope cash retainer, photos, my notebook of observations. He flipped through it slowly. You've done half my job already. I'm old, not blind, I said. Track Brian Mercer. His purchases, his pharmacy visits, his online orders. I want everything. Got it. You want me to inform the police first? Not yet. I paused. They'll need evidence. He's counting on me losing control. I won't give him that. When I got home, the house was too quiet again. But this time, I welcomed the silence. It gave me room to think. I pulled out all of Linda's pill bottles, lined them up on the kitchen counter. 2 were hers, 4 weren't. Labels mismatched. Dosages off by decimals that could kill. I photographed every one, time-stamped. Stored the photos on a USB drive labeled Medlog 1. Next, I copied the text from Jessica and Brian, every message, since Linda's first, I'll stay a few more days. Reading them felt like swallowing glass. She's fine, don't worry. Brian's helping so much. Dad, stop overthinking. Overthinking. That's what they always called it when I got too close to truth. I backed everything up twice. 1 copy in the safe. 1 on a flash drive hidden behind the family photo albums. As the night fell, I poured myself a drink but didn't touch it. I just stared at the ice melting slowly, watching order dissolve into chaos, 1 cube at a time. After 40 years of order, I whispered, I know what chaos looks like. People who fear paper trails. Before bed, I checked the locks twice, then once more for good measure. I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. The red and blue lights pulsed across the living room walls like a slow heartbeat. 2 uniformed officers stood in the doorway, cautious but polite. They'd been called by a concerned relative, Brian, naturally. He'd timed it perfectly. He greeted them with his best version of humility, shoulders slightly hunched, voice soft and earnest. Officers, thank you for coming. I didn't want to bother you, but my father-in-law's been different since my mother-in-law passed. We're all just worried. He even smiled at me, like we were partners in this performance. Jessica stood behind him, clutching a tissue she hadn't used. He hasn't been sleeping, she added. He says someone poisoned Mom. I said someone did. I corrected quietly. Brian turned toward them, palms open. See what I mean? He's been forgetful since retirement. We've all been worried. For a moment the officer's expressions shifted the way I expected they believed him. Middle-aged man in a tailored shirt, soft voice, wife trembling behind him. A picture of patience. But I'd spent 40 years watching liars build walls with words. Sir, the taller officer said to me, let's talk over here, all right? We moved into my study. I let him see the order. Labeled folders, time-stamped photos, USBs sealed in Ziploc bags. I'm not confused, I said evenly. My wife's tox screen came back with an unprescribed sedative in her system. Her medication bottles were swapped. These, I pointed to the counter, aren't her prescriptions. He crouched to look, jotting something in his notebook. Where did these come from? Ask my son-in-law. They were at his house when she collapsed. He brought them back to mine. That's called contamination of evidence. The younger officer joined us. Mr. Hale, we just need to make sure everyone's safe tonight. You're saying you suspect foul play? I'm saying I have timelines, receipts, and recordings. I've already spoken with counsel. I'm reporting a potential poisoning and property interference. I'd like the medications bagged and preserved. The older one nodded slowly. Understood. He signaled the other to collect the bottles with gloves. In the living room, Brian's voice rose just enough to carry. I think grief is confusing him. He's fixated on details that don't matter. We just want him to rest. Liars love noise. Évidence préfère quiet. Jessica sniffled for the camera she'd set discreetly on the mantel, filming herself being a dutiful daughter. Dad, please. Let's just move on. Mom wouldn't want this. I turned back to the officers. You see that? I asked calmly. They talk about peace while erasing truth. That's not grief. That's strategy. One of the officers cleared his throat. All right, folks, let's take a breath. We're not determining guilt tonight. Everyone needs to stand down and let the process work. Brian nodded eagerly. Absolutely, officer. Whatever helps Dad feel better. His tone made my teeth ache. As they wrapped up, the older officer lingered by my door. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Do you have recordings, sir?" I met his eyes. "Yes." He gave a small nod. "Keep them safe. We'll note it in the report." After they left, Brian's mask slipped just enough to show teeth. "You really think you can play detective at your age?" "No," I said, gathering my folders. "I already did." He smirked. "You're going to regret this." "Maybe," I replied, sliding a file back into the cabinet, the drawer closing with a precise click. "But so will you." He left with Jessica, muttering something about getting a lawyer. I didn't stop him, let him. The house went quiet again, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I sat down at my desk, pressed play on my phone, and listened to an old call, the one where Brian's voice had smiled through the line and said, "I just want to make Jessica happy again." That was when the noise began. And now, finally, I had more than a feeling. I had a voice. The officers came back 2 nights later. I'd been expecting them. The knock was polite but heavy, the kind of knock that carries authority. I opened the door and stepped aside without a word. The house still smelled faintly of Linda's lavender oil, the last trace of her that hadn't been turned into evidence. Brian and Jessica were already there when the patrol cars pulled up, standing in the driveway rehearsing their smiles. She wore a gray cardigan, subdued, respectful. He held her shoulders as if steadying grief itself. "Mr. Hale," the senior officer said, nodding, "we're following up on your report. You mentioned you had something for us?" I led them to my study. Brian trailed behind, trying to sound casual. "We're happy to cooperate, officer. There's just been a misunderstanding. My father-in-law is under a lot of stress." I didn't respond. I opened my laptop and pressed play. From the speakers came Brian's easy voice, warm and coaxing. "Come on, Mom, these gummies are organic. Jessica takes them every night. They'll help you sleep." Then Linda's soft laugh. "I already have my medication." His tone changed lighter, too quick. "Those pills are too strong. Try these instead, okay? Doctor says natural's better." Silence. Then the faint crinkle of a wrapper, the sound of her trust being poisoned. The room went still. The officers exchanged a look. One leaned closer, his hand unconsciously resting on his body cam. "Mr. Hale," the senior one said, "may we get a copy of that file?" "Already on a drive," I said, handing him a sealed USB. Date, stamped, backed up twice. Jessica's composure cracked. "You're cruel," she spat. "You're twisting things." He was trying to help. Brian placed a firm hand on her arm, squeezing hard enough to make her flinch. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Honey, let's not make a scene." He turned to the officers, voice full of wounded patience. "She's distraught. My wife loved her mother. I don't know what he's trying to prove." One of the officers pointed toward the counter. "Those the supplements?" "Yes," I said. "You'll find the labels switched. Look closely, manufacturer's name doesn't exist. They were ordered under Brian's email." The younger officer photographed them methodically, gloves rustling. "We'll take these for analysis." Jessica folded her arms, her voice trembling now. "You're destroying this family over vitamins." I looked at her, really looked at her, my daughter, who once brought me cold coffee during long trial nights just to keep me company. "Respect isn't performing grief for strangers," I said quietly. "It's not poisoning your mother-in-law." Her mouth opened, then closed. The senior officer straightened. "Until this is resolved, I'm going to ask you both to leave the property. We'll be in touch once the lab confirms toxicology." Brian started to protest, but the officer raised a hand. "Now." They stepped out onto the porch, the night air washing over their faces. The mask finally slipped from Brian's expression, cold, annoyed, calculating. He leaned in close to Jessica, not realizing the porch light caught his face clearly. "Don't say a word," he hissed, his fingers digging into her hand. The door shut behind them. For the first time since Linda died, I exhaled without shaking. The quiet felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. Proof had weight, and I'd finally made them feel it. The officer paused on his way out. "Mr. Hale, you've done everything right. Let us handle it from here." I nodded. But inside, I knew the law moves slow, and men like Brian move fast. As the patrol cars rolled down the driveway, blue light flickered across the living room walls, fading until the night swallowed it whole. "They left my porch that night," I said into the dark. but not my life. For one night, I thought I could breathe again. The officers had heard the recording. The truth was finally out there, sitting in evidence bags and USB drives. I made myself a quiet dinner and even poured a glass of Linda's favorite red, though it didn't taste like anything. Then the phone buzzed. Again and again. At first, I thought it was condolences, but the subject lines were all the same. So sorry to hear, Richard. Is it true? What's going on? I opened Facebook. Jessica's face filled the screen, makeup soft, lighting gentle, voice trembling with just the right pitch of heartbreak. Please pray for us, she said. Dad won't stop attacking us during our grief. He's confused and angry. We're doing our best to forgive him. Below, a photo of her hugging Brian in front of my house. Caption, family should heal, not hate. Comments poured in: friends, church members, neighbors, people who'd shared casseroles with Linda. Poor Jessica. She's always been so kind. That man must be losing it. Old age can do that to a person. Each word was a knife turned slow. I didn't reply. I didn't post my side. Years in court had taught me when you argue with liars in public, you only teach them how to lie better. Still, the silence hurt. By midnight, my phone was full of messages. Some careful, some cruel. You need help, Richard. She was your only daughter. Let it go before you lose everything. I walked to the shelf where Linda's glass still sat, a faint smudge of her lipstick on the rim. I held it for a moment, then set it back exactly where it had been. Order was all I had left. Across the room, Emily's photo caught the light, our little girl in her graduation cap, frozen in a world before betrayal. I turned the frame face down. I couldn't bear to have her looking at me like that. After 40 years of hard work, I murmured, "This is what I get. Memories twisted, my name used like trash." The leather chair by the window creaked as I sank into it. I didn't sleep. The hours dragged, the house breathing its hollow rhythm. Outside, the lake was still. Even the crickets had gone quiet. The notifications didn't stop, each one a tiny wound. Angry face, sad face, prayer emoji. They'd rewritten my story, and the world had believed them. Dawn came gray and cold. The first light hit the filing cabinet, turning its edges to silver. I reached for the folder with my notes and slid it open again. The truth doesn't need applause, it just needs patience. At 6:12 a.m., my phone buzzed one last time. A message preview appeared. The message came just after sunrise. I hadn't moved from the chair. My eyes were dry, the kind of dry that only grief and sleepless nights can make. I stared at the screen until the words steadied themselves. "Mr. Hale, I think you should see something. Robert across the street." 15 minutes later, there was a soft knock. Robert stood on my porch with 2 coffees in hand. He was wearing his usual flannel, hair neatly combed, the kind of man who still shoveled the whole block sidewalk every winter. "I didn't want to get in the middle," he said quietly, stepping inside, "but I can't sleep knowing what I heard." He set the coffee down and pulled a small USB drive from his pocket. "Door cam. Mine's got a good angle on your driveway. And, audio, too. It picks up across the cul-de-sac." We sat at the dining table, the one Linda used to polish every Sunday afternoon. I plugged the drive into my laptop. The footage was time-stamped 11:42 p.m., the night of the collapse. First, Jessica appeared, holding her phone high, live streaming as she wandered toward my front porch. Her voice was chipper, false. "Mom loves this place," she said to the camera. "Such a peaceful night, huh?" Then she turned the camera inside my home, panning across the living room, through the kitchen, right up the staircase toward the master bedroom, my sanctuary. Robert's camera caught Brian behind her, in the corner of the frame, slipping something into his jacket pocket. When I paused the video, I could see the faint glint of an amber pill bottle. Robert leaned closer. "That's the same night, right?" "Yes." My voice cracked, but not from surprise, from confirmation. We scrubbed forward on the timeline. Another clip. Brian on his phone, half hidden by their SUV. The audio was faint, but clear enough. After probate, we're set. I froze the screen, the timestamp matching perfectly with my handwritten log, the one I'd kept out of sheer instinct. Robert exhaled slowly. "That's what I heard last week when you called the ambulance. Didn't sound right then. Doesn't sound right now." "Oh." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The coffee went cold between us. Finally, I said, You just gave my wife a voice. He nodded once, embarrassed by the weight of it. I figured justice isn't loud. It's a steady neighbor with a good battery and a conscience. I smiled for the first time in weeks. It felt foreign, like an old muscle remembering its job. Within the hour, I called my attorney, Dana Pierce, a woman I'd trusted for years. She listened as I described the footage, my documentation, the talks report. Her tone sharpened. Send me everything. We're moving this to probate court and criminal investigation. No press yet. Let's build before we strike. I looked out the window toward Robert's house, his flag flapping in the morning wind. Thank you, I whispered, not just for the footage, but for proof that decency still existed. When I hung up, the plan was already forming. By the time the weekend came, the grief had hardened into something colder: structure, purpose. Dana called it paper warfare. I called it coming home to myself. We sat at my dining table, now covered in files instead of dinner plates. Dana spread out forms and exhibits with surgical precision. We start here, she said, tapping a document. Restraining order against both of them, no contact, no harassment. Then a wrongful death action. We'll hit them civilly before the state does. She looked at me over her glasses. You sure you're ready for this? I was ready the minute they said organic gummies. She smiled faintly. Good, because this will get ugly. The printer hummed, spitting out pages, bank subpoenas, pharmacy records, PI reports. Tom, the investigator, had outdone himself. He'd traced Brian's financials back 6 months, casino markers in Reno, payday loans, wire transfers to an unregistered account under Jessica's name. Classic debt spiral, Tom said over speakerphone. He needed cash fast. Your wife's life insurance, probate assets, joint account. He was counting every dollar before she was gone. Dana added, that ties motive directly to opportunity. We'll file Monday. The room felt smaller as the paper stack grew taller. Each page was a weapon: dates, signatures, transactions. Not opinions. Evidence. My phone buzzed again. Jessica. Her text read, Dad, please. Be reasonable. Take down anything you're planning. It'll embarrass the family. Embarrass the family. I typed back 3 words and deleted them, then typed one instead. Noted. Because kindness without boundaries is a volunteer position in your own destruction. That evening, Dana and I finalized a concise public statement. No emotion, no adjectives, just chronology. We don't need drama, she said. We need daylight. When the drafts were done, I leaned back in my chair. The house looked different now. The same walls, but the air had shifted from mourning to motion. I've stopped defending, I said quietly. Now I'm prosecuting. On Monday morning, the process server delivered the first strike. Robert and I watched from across the street. The server walked up the path to Brian's front door, camera rolling per protocol. Brian answered in his usual golf shirt, smirk already loaded. Mr. Mercer? The server asked. Yes? He handed him the envelope. You've been served temporary restraining order, civil summons. The smile vanished mid-breath. The camera caught it perfectly, the precise second where arrogance met accountability. Jessica appeared behind him, clutching her phone, already live streaming. This is harassment, she cried. But the officer standing by the sidewalk only said, Ma'am, please step back. Robert looked at me, his voice low. That's the face of a man realizing he's not untouchable. I didn't answer. I just closed the folder in my lap. I didn't argue with them. I introduced them to consequences. By dawn, the upload was complete. Dana had curated every file like an exhibit, no adjectives, no emotion, just timestamps and sources. Title, for transparency. At 7:04 a.m., we posted. First came the audio. Brian's coaxing voice, smooth and lethal. Come on, Mom, these gummies are organic. Jessica takes them every night. Then, the doorcam footage from Robert Jessica live streaming through my house. Brian pocketing the pill bottle. Next, the pharmacy logs. Same batch numbers. Cross-referenced against Linda's tox report. And finally, the bank statement's wire transfers. Casino payments. The digital trail of motive. We didn't tell people how to feel. We just let them listen. By noon, the thread had been shared in every local Facebook group, from Lakefield to Mason County. The comments shifted in real time. Wait, I remember that post, she said. He was confused. This doesn't look like confusion. This looks like guilt. He was right all along. Jessica tried one last post her final performance. A close-up selfie, tear-streaked and frantic. "He's manipulating everything. Please don't believe what you're seeing." But the top comment ended the show. "We saw the footage." Apology messages began pouring into my inbox. Old friends, neighbors, even a few who had shared her lies. "I'm so sorry, Richard. We didn't know." One woman wrote, "I made banana bread for them that week. I feel sick." I didn't reply. Forgiveness wasn't the goal. Truth was. Dana called that afternoon. Preliminary injunction came through. Judge froze the probate account and issued a protective order. "You're in the clear, Richard." I exhaled, steady and deep. "How's Brian holding up?" She chuckled without humor. "Cracking. His lawyer just reached out. He's offering cooperation in exchange for leniency." Against Jessica? Against both. But yes, she's the focus now. She handled the money, the posts, the distribution. Outside my window, the mail truck passed by. The sound strangely peaceful. For the first time in months, the air in this house didn't feel hostile. An hour later, Dana forwarded the new docket entry. Cooperating witness affidavit Brian Mercer. His signature sat neatly at the bottom. The same penmanship that once signed birthday cards to Linda. I stared at it for a long time. Not satisfaction, clarity. They had taken my peace, my reputation, my marriage of 40 years and turned it into spectacle. I had taken it back, piece by piece, using the only thing that ever held its ground. Proof. "You took my peace," I murmured to the empty room. "I took back the truth." That evening, the sunset over the lake came golden and clean, reflecting off the glass like it used to. No more flashing lights, no more cameras, no more noise. Just the sound of still water and the faint click of the filing cabinet closing order restored. I guess 99% of you will hear this, sigh and scroll past, not clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you, and where are you listening? 6 months later, the house was quiet again, peaceful, not empty. The kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore. The court process had turned its wheels, slow but steady. Brian's cooperation deal held. Jessica's role was confirmed in writing. No more hearings, no more headlines, just paperwork and closure. I spent the morning cleaning, the same way Linda used to when something heavy lifted off her shoulders. The marble counters gleamed under the sunlight. The lake breeze carried the salt of early spring through open windows. The air smelled like soap and forgiveness, clean, simple, earned. On the shelf, a single crystal glass stood next to the folded flag from my father's service. I didn't drink anymore. I kept the glass as a reminder that even fragile things can hold strength if you don't overfill them. A notification blinked on my phone. A text from an unknown number, though I didn't need to guess. "If you loved me, you'd make this go away." Huh? I stared at it for a long while. The same manipulation, stripped of polish, now bare, desperate. I typed a reply and deleted it before sending. Then I powered off the phone. Some doors stay closed for a reason. I'd already told Dana my decision. No contact until therapy, restitution, and time. Family isn't blood, it's accountability. She agreed. The order remained in place. In the study, the filing cabinet waited, its drawers precise, aligned. The last folder, Hale v. Mercer, was finally complete. I slipped it into the bottom drawer, pushed it shut, and turned the key. "Forgiveness isn't amnesia," I whispered. "It's locking the door and keeping the key." For a moment, I stood still, listening to the house breathe. The old leather chair creaked softly behind me. I sat down and let my hand rest on its worn armrest, remembering the countless nights I'd sat there, staring at the same lake, trying to understand how kindness had turned into currency for others. Linda's favorite scarf still hung by the door, faintly scented of lavender. I didn't move it. Some things belonged exactly where they were last loved. Then I turned to the photo on my desk, Emily's face frozen mid-laughter. For months, it had faced down, hidden under the weight of grief and shame. Now, I lifted it carefully and turned it upright again. Her smile met the morning light. Outside, the world had gone on the neighbor mowing his lawn, a dog barking at gulls, the rhythm of ordinary life resuming. I opened the door, stepped out into the sunlight, and let it warm my hands. I had built this sanctuary with my hands. I protected it with my mind. The past was still there, written in files in memory, but it no longer owned me.